But I remember one day I went to go explain why I have a biomechanical half sleeve and how it came about. The reason why I had given myself a biomech sleeve was because I had realized that I had become a machine. I was losing my humanity. That's literally how I saw it. I said to myself, I was like, damn, I'm no longer viewing these people and their situations with any kind of emotion or compassion or any understanding or any kind of anything really. It was literally black and white. That was it. Either it is or it isn't. It's either respect or it's disrespect. It's either up or it's down. It's right or it's wrong. There's nothing in between. Nothing else matters. It either benefits the group or the benefits the look for the group, or it's got to go. And that's my responsibility, was to look after 30 or 40 of these natives that were depending on me to navigate us through these waters with all these different organizations that significantly outnumbered us. So I was under a lot of pressure to make sure that our image was always on point. Nobody could question any of us here because they know that our process is very rigorous. You can't have any kind of messed up charges, and everybody here is going to put in work. And that went a long way in getting the respect of every other car that was on the yard. And that did benefit us. It definitely benefited us because there were times where I specifically even referenced this in my interview with Chad. A couple natives went to the shoe and they put some Serranos in there. And when the natives got back out, the guys that were in there didn't know that, it was a native cell. And they were like, nah, you got to pay us for this shit. That's what the homies, so a couple of foot soldiers had told the natives that were there. And so the natives came out, they got me, and they said, "Hey, the Serranos just tried. They're basically extorting us for the cell." And right away, I'm like, "Fuck," like there's like a good 50, 60 Serranos here, and they're gonna go. They're definitely gonna go. And I was like, "Oof, that's not good." you know, I told the natives there that where everybody was standing around, I was like, this is probably going to get ugly. I was like, if they're really standing on this, if they really are green lighting this and expect us to pay, I was like, that the implications of it are wider than just this one time for this cell, you know, because now what's to stop them to doing from doing it to every other native in that cell or in that pod? What's to stop them from doing it and just running us off and taking our tables, our TVs, our everything, you know, because they do outnumber us 2 to 3 to 1. And although, you know, all of us natives do have heart, not all of them are peak physical condition, soldiers. Not all of them are like that. We had some OGs, we had some old heads there. We had guys that were living a really, comfy life with per cap checks on the casino and, like, lobster buffets and stuff. Some of them were really, they were sitting well for the winter. Let's put it that way. Some of them weren't they weren't fighters. They'll fight, but it just would be bad. You know, as far as young capable fighting warriors that we probably had 10, 15 guys that could hold their own. The rest would probably get knocked out or picked off, and the rest of us would be fighting back to back in a corner somewhere, while the rest of them just consumed you all the way around you. I've seen it, you know. So I already knew that the odds of us doing anything other than ambushing them, one of the ones that, would make the most sense to get, just to send the message. But I mean, it's like, and then whatever we do, it echoes further, So if we can't just get taken advantage of, I can't let that happen here and then go answer for that somewhere else. But I can also start a war, you know, and it not be over something that at the end of the day they would have said, man, fuck that cell. Why don't you motherfuckers just turn around and buy another cell? What was the problem with that? Would you guys have no fucking money? It could have went either way. You're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't sometimes. It really just, but we ended up calling a meeting, and then I got word that they were going to be out there in full force. And so we all were on the basketball court, and they were all piled up on the other side of the basketball court, and we were on the bleachers and stuff. And I looked over at the back, I looked at all of them, and I was like, look, I was like, this might, I need you guys to all know that this might go down right here. I said, I'm gonna go over there and I'm gonna hear them out. And I said, I'm gonna see if they really expect us to, pay. I was like, we might get into it. I said, and if you guys, whether or not you just sit there and watch it happen until they come for you, or if you want to run up and we all fight them all together, or what, I said, it's up to you guys. I said, but our best bet is sticking together and fighting them all at once. I was like, if not, you know, we'll see y'all in the shoe. We'll see everybody in the fucking shoe. And I seen about 3 or 4 of them start walking towards us, along with one of them that was their shot caller at the time. His name was, I think it was like Angel or something like that, I think they called him. So me and like 3 of my guys, we matched them, body for body. And we met in the middle of the basketball court. And as soon as we got there, the guy reached over, he shook my hand, I shook his hand, and that was kind of a tense moment because, he could have shook my hand and then stuck me with the other, or, they could have all just, pulled me right into the middle of them. And, I mean, it could have went whatever, you got to be ready for pretty much anything, especially with Serranos, because the fact that we're on an FCI has zero to do with it. These guys are fucking, they're lit. They'll get crazy, don't matter where they are. If they are legit, they will get down. Your life is just as much danger dealing with them in a camp or an FCI as it is with them in a pen. But one of them walked up and they shook my hand and he let me go, and he said, hey, we heard about what happened. He said, don't worry about it. The homies, they're going to move out as soon as they get back. And, our bad. Dispensa. Hope everything's cool. No hard feelings. I was like, yeah, man. Hey, it's cool. Thank you. We appreciate it. And they said, hey, yeah, man. It was just a misunderstanding. They were just a couple of young guys just being knuckleheads. They didn't think of their actions. He said they didn't think about what they were doing. He's like, if it would have been somebody else, maybe then yeah. They're like, if it was somebody else, then maybe yeah. If they could get it, they can get it. If somebody pays them, that's on them. But he goes, no, we're not going to fuck with you guys like that. And that let me know that it mattered. It mattered more now than ever. That when you have smaller numbers, you guys have to run a tighter ship. You guys' bar of you guys have to have significantly more respect for yourselves. But a lot of people got beat up maintaining that image. A lot of people got smashed, rushed off to the infirmary for a lot of different reasons. It does get to a point where I remember a couple instances where some young guy showed up, just turned like 19, and we heard his story out. He told us, he was like, look, I'm still with my girlfriend. She's 18 right now. Like, you know, we were like 18 and 16 or something like that. Or no, I think he was like, I don't even remember. All I know is like they had a kid together. They were still together. They were only like a couple of years apart, but the parents were beefing or something like that, and they pressed charges on him. Like they really made their lives a kind of a living hell. And we basically said, well, look, we're not going to let you walk. You know, we're going to let you go up top. You're going to have to leave. We're not going to beat you up because it is convincing, but if we start letting you slide, then we have to start letting other people slide. And I was like, we're really going against the grain by not putting hands on you in the first place, because there's probably other people that we didn't hear out and just beat the shit out of right off the top of the fucking right out the gate, because it doesn't matter. You know, the charge is the charge. You know, and a lot of people do plead guilty to things that they're scared to fight because they don't have adequate or encouraging counsel, or counsel that really cares whether or not you did what they are accusing you of. You know, because I'm not going to get into all that. That's not the point of this video, but I do know that not everybody is guilty of the things that they end up getting put in jail for. And if you have any trouble believing that, then start watching a lot of traffic cases. A lot of people get trumped up charges, and they get the shit beat out of them, and you know, like it's crazy. So there's a lot of people just in traffic infractions that are getting roughed up by the police every day, and are pleading guilty and losing out on any kind of civil compensations because they were charged, they pled guilty to things that they didn't actually do. They'll eventually get their day in court, but that's years. It takes a lot of time, takes a lot of money, takes a lot of legal counsel and stuff, and it's a pain. But that's exactly what they want. They want to drag you through the legal system because it's a machine, and you're just a man or a woman. You know, it's a long drawn out battle. But that young kid, we give him the opportunity to go up top, right? To just walk his ass up there and tell him, hey, we got to go. And he went up there, and the next move, they called me out of the unit. And I remember coming out of the unit, and he was standing there along with a couple natives. And I'm already like annoyed, you know, because I'm like, I told this dude to go. He should have been gone already. You know, I'm already like, I'm just looking for any reason at this point, you know, like just he, I was disobeyed, basically, right? Or I was challenged. Like this dude thinks it's not important for him to take this opportunity to leave when I gave him the opportunity to leave. And it turns out that the LT had refused to let him check in because he didn't know anybody's names. And now I'm annoyed with the LT because I'm like, you guys are always jumping on my ass about why somebody gets beat up, and when's it going to stop, and next time you guys do it, this and that, whatever. And the third, I said, and I finally allow somebody to come up top on their own and you turn them away. I was like, you think it's a game now. It was you. You thought I thought it was a game. No, no. I think you think it's a fucking game, because this man's life is in jeopardy, and, and now I have to make a statement, because that was stupid. Whatever you just said, whatever you just did, you sent him back out because he didn't know anybody's names. You already know everybody's fucking names here. Pick one, you know? Like, how hard is it? Pick me. I don't give a fuck. Pick somebody. Write it up however you need to, but somebody wants to get the fuck off the yard because they are worried something's going to happen to them. So now I turned to the two natives that were standing there and I said, hey, I said, walk with him back up to the LT's office. I said, walk right up to the fucking LT's office. I said, both of you turn to him, introduce yourselves to him, and then beat the fuck out of him right there in front of the LT, and don't stop until they fucking pull you off of him. And they were like, okay. They walked off, and literally within minutes, boom, attention, attention, all inmates get down on the ground. I'm like, and they pulled me up for that. They did. They came and fucking scooped me up, and they were mad. They were mad because when they finally, they get him, they sprayed them down and shit. I guess they were trying to, like, they wrestled with them and got back to the guy and beat the shit out of him some more, and they were like it was bad. It was a bad ass beating. It was a bad ass beating, not a bad ass beating, but you know what I mean. And so now they get to interview the guy, and he basically said, "Yeah, you wanted a couple names," so they introduced themselves to me, and then they beat the shit out of me in front of y'all. And they definitely brought that up to me, and it wasn't. They weren't amused by that. They weren't amused by that. That's how I know on one of those occasions that I know they can hold you for two SIS investigations, which is basically, I forget now. It's either 2 months or 3 months. So they can hold you for 3 months in one investigation, is what I think it is. And then they can turn around and reinvestigate you for another 90 days. Now, if they do it again, they have to go, either it has to be approved by, I think it's the feds, somebody above them. I know that they have to go above their usual in-house chain of command to approve somebody being locked in their room for 9 months, just straight 9 months of incarceration. I've experienced one of those in my bid. That's how I know that they had to get approval from somebody else, because I was talking shit to them. I was like, yeah, no, we're at the end of 2 investigations. You got to let me go. I've never been held for longer than 2 investigations. So fuck you. You got to let me out. Suck a dick. I was just talking shit to them, and they're like, "No, we're waiting to hear back right now. We're gonna get approval to run another 90 days on you. Then you can get out." And they got it. They got it. They can get it when you have consistently shown that you are a threat to the security and orderly running of the institution. I don't have a lot of the paperwork from federal prison like a lot of other people do. I wish I did. I really wish I did, because a lot of the times that I went to the SHU was just SIS investigations. Just a lot of them. A lot of them. And every time they've shipped me on the transfer order, or whatever it is that they give you, it deems you a security threat group in there. They say that you are a threat to the security and orderly running of the institution. Your presence is deemed, basically detrimental to the population or the staff. That's how they word it. And I've read that numerous times throughout my entire bid. But I don't have a lot of that paperwork. I've lost a lot of the paperwork over the years, getting transferred 8 or 9 times. They'll do that. Entire boxes would just go missing. Conveniently, with like your most prized shit, sometimes it'll be stuff missing from different boxes. So it's like, it's not even like some places, I think inmates are getting to it and they're taking whatever they want, things that are valuable. But I've lost entire folders of music that I've written when I used to write music. I've lost eagle feathers. I've lost, I mean, anything and everything. I've lost all my shots like that. I've lost entire photo albums like that. Transfer process is just fucked up. It's just it's a it's a crap shot. It's a crapshoot whether or not you're going to get all your property when property comes. Everybody knows how stressful that is, going through your property and realizing that there's a lot of stuff that's missing because you don't have much. You don't have a lot, but it is what it is. I do have 3 different types of shots to this day, though. And conveniently enough, none of them are the same. One of them is a one on one. It's a one on one shot. It's a fighting shot. Another one is basically a 3-on-1 fighting shot, and the other one is a 4-on-1 stabbing. So the range, the range of the different things that I've been involved in, it'll tell you pretty much everything that needs to be known. There were a lot of instances where I was quick to just have people beat up, and I didn't really feel bad about it. And I knew I didn't feel bad about it. I just knew that it was necessary. At the end of the day, it mattered how we were perceived by everybody else. And so, anytime one of our own would disrespect another race or would, run up bills that they couldn't pay and were disrespectful about it, um, it just got to a point where I was definitely the asshole. Um, a lot of the guys that had been there with me for years, I know for a fact, some of them, they did not like me. They got quiet. They got quiet when I came around. They'd stop talking about what they were talking about. And it would get back to me. People would tell me I had eyes and ears that would let me know, you know, I wasn't liked. I mean, everybody, but I also knew that it's not guaranteed for you to be liked by everybody. Not everybody's going to agree, you know, and that's going to happen, which is okay because at the end of the day, you have to be secure in the knowledge that you did what was fair, you know, in the grand scheme of everything. Because if everything does result in whether or not the safety of the group is at risk or not, nobody can really argue against you. But anytime respect is involved, it is life and death in there. Because at any moment that somebody feels disrespected, it is a possibility for violence. But it did become such a commonplace thing that I had realized that it had done permanent damage to a part of me that I was kind of still yet trying to understand. I knew that whatever this was that was my reality at that point in time. It was affecting me, and I wasn't seeing clearly anymore. And it was also about that time that I had done something very different, which I've done that, right? I've kind of experimented in those positions as well. I had implemented what we called a position for a spiritual advisor. And basically, we nominated an older gentleman there who was very traditional, spoke his own language. I'll even say his name because I got no problem, putting that out there. People need to know. But whether or not somebody will get named again and again and repeatedly 3 4 generation 3 or 4 decades later is a part of the consequence of those actions and those decisions. you know Even if it did die down and he's having a good life, even if he's out or if he's even still alive, and I bring attention back to it, that's a part of the deal. That's a part of the consequences of your decisions. But his name was Bruce Sonnenberg, and him and his whole family showed up in federal prison for a conspiracy ring, right? Like a big crack dealing ring. And so all of their paperwork was cool, right? It had everything that they needed to show, and he had a couple sons that were there with him, and all their paperwork was cool. They showed up and they had it right there, and it showed the amounts and and everything. I suspected that they had told on each other, but it was literally just the whole family, and I was like, I mean, fuck it, if they're all getting along, then it's really not my business. They all got time. They all had at least 10 years to do or something like that. So I really didn't even I couldn't even honestly say that they did tell or not, because I know that at the very minimum, conspiracy starts at 10, and depending on how much more time above that is purely dependent on a lot of things that I really had no concern and really looking into. I just know that they checked out initially. But their father was very traditional, knew his whole language, and he was the one that was running the sweat lodge. Um, he was leading all the prayers. We needed people there that knew what they were doing with the sweat lodge and the pipe, the sacred pipe. You know, we could, you know, we could have everybody raise their hand who actually all knows how to run a sweat lodge ceremony and who actually knows songs, and there's only going to be a couple hands. And if we don't have those individuals there, we don't have a ceremony. We're just going to be standing around, basically trying to make it up as we go, and like it would be a joke. It would be a farce. It would be kind of a sad thing to see, for real. But we always were fortunate to have an old head, or somebody who was still very close to the traditional ways, that could take the reins on those ceremonies, on the days that we were allowed to pray and have those rituals. Because without them, it would just feel like we were in prison still. This one moment wouldn't feel like we were at home or at a powwow, or like my dad used to have sweat lodges. He used to run sweat lodges and stuff. So every time I go to a sweat lodge and somebody knows what they're doing and I hear a lot of familiar songs, it is a little bit like getting a taste of home. But Bruce was still into all that, and him and his whole family actually would go around and compete in powwows. And they had a drum group. They had a drum group. I forget what it's called, but Apparently, they were good. I think they were good. As far as I could tell, they were pretty decent at it. A point in time came where I started to have some discussions with Bruce, and I didn't get any kind of crazy vibes from him. I really didn't. I really didn't. I thought he was a good dude, and he had a good head on his shoulders. And I found myself conferring with him at times. I remember asking him, I said, "Damn, Bruce," I said, "do you think I'm fucking?" I was like, "Do you think I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing?" I was like it was what I'm doing right. I can't tell anymore. Like I can't tell anymore. And he was like, I remember what he said. He said, he goes, "I don't think it's for me to say whether or not it's right." And I should have heard it. It made sense later on. He couldn't bring himself to condemn the same men when he himself was one of them. But that snuck past me. I thought he was basically saying that, he wasn't going to speak on it. But he did have some wise things to say at times. I did catch myself considering some of the things that he had to say at times. And so we ended up having a meeting one day, and we nominated him to this position of spiritual advisor. And he would basically stand in at any kind of like important meeting where we might have to go to war, or smash somebody or move against somebody, or just anything to do with politics. He was basically there as a moral compass, basically like a moral compass or a soundboard, somebody to kind of let us know, you guys are you're doing good, or you guys are being bogus, or I think you guys are being kind of rash right now. Maybe you guys should reconsider. You might be running a little hot. He would try to be the balance to our super aggressive, bloodthirsty tendencies. He was basically supposed to counterbalance what we had become, what we all were becoming, which was just somebody that was quick to want to see blood for any reason, you know, because it's like I've said it before, it's like sharks at feeding time. I don't know what it is, but once you've lost somebody, a friend of yours, somebody that you're close to, once you see them get smashed for something that you really didn't agree with, the next time you see somebody else commit something similar to whatever it is that somebody you fucked with had done, you can catch yourself pushing that, pushing that into the spotlight at times. I've lost a lot of good friends over the years, over situations that I wanted to go rogue on. I wanted to go fucking rogue, and I wanted to crash out, and I wanted to avenge him. But it's an animal, and you're just one cell of an entire animal, and that animal will chew its own leg off, and that leg might be you. You know, so you have to recognize that you are part of a larger animal. You're a part of a larger feral wild dog. And so long as you're in line with that feral wild dog, you won't always be in danger. But sometimes that dog will attack itself. And you might be the limb that gets attacked. But Bruce was even asked to hold certain ceremonies that you wouldn't think you'd see going down in prison, like naming ceremonies. I know that he gave a couple people their Indian names. Um, he performed a couple other ceremonies, stuff that I'm not even entirely sure what the point was. I didn't always attend those things. I would pop in here and there, and I'd hang out for a move every so often. But for the most part, I wasn't doing right, so I stayed away. I had a lot of respect for our beliefs and our ways and the rituals, and yeah, I wasn't always doing right. So I wasn't trying to perpetrate and go into the sweat lodge and handle the sacred pipe and stuff. I just wasn't going to do it. But Bruce was a part of our circle for a few years, all the way up to the end. I want to say about 2 or 3 years he was there. By then, he had seen a couple different power structures pass within the native group since he had arrived. When he had arrived, the Red Lakers had the yard for us, and it was just Red Lakers. There were nobody there that was claiming any gangs at that time, and but for the most part, there was a dominant group of Red Lakers that had an old head that had come from Terre Haute, and he had the yard for us. And we were all pretty much in agreement with that because we wanted somebody who, with that kind of experience, running driving the car. But he ended up getting shipped, or he ended up going home, or I think he went to the shoe and then he went home from the shoe, if I'm not mistaken. But when he got rolled up, when he went to the shoe, one of his homeboys immediately just assumed his position, didn't run it by us or anything like that. And they called a meeting and basically were like, yeah, this is just how it is now. So this is just, just letting y'all know this is, I'm, I'm me now. And, like you just basically pretty much just tried to tell us like it was right then and there. And nobody said anything. And I didn't really know where to stand on it at the moment. And they walked off. And it was a couple of days, or maybe even just a day of, might have been just a day or two of muffled conversations before they had approached me and said, "Hey, we're basically gonna separate from the Red Lakers, and basically how it's gonna play out is you're gonna have it for all the northern natives and the southern natives. There's only like 3 or 4 of them. They're gonna do their own thing, and then there's like a Oklahoma native, and there was another. I think there was like another different kind of native, an Alaskan native. They're gonna fall in under you. So basically, we're all agreeing to fall under you, and it's just going to be the Red Lakers. They can do whatever they want. That's the way we're going to word it, and you know, we'll see what they do." And so that was basically what I ended up having to propose to this guy who was a self-appointed shot caller of the entire native car. And that conversation was pretty, it was pretty tense. I had a couple of natives with me, and I'm standing there, and I had like a khaki shirt on, and it wasn't buttoned, and I didn't have a shirt on underneath it because if we were going to fight, I wanted to be able to immediately come out the shirt and not have anything that they could grab onto. And I did basically told them what they told me, and I said, "No, listen," because I said, "Look, we're going to do our own thing. So you could be in charge of the Red Lakers." I was like, "But everybody else pretty much is doesn't recognize you, and this is how it's going to play out." And they're like, "Okay, cool, yeah, you can find your own tables then." And I'm like, "Oh, we can find our own tables." And he was like, "Well, yeah, if you're cutting away from the main native car, then yeah, you're gonna have to find your own tables." And I was like, "No, I don't think you're understanding." I was like, "I don't think you're not mathing here." I was like, "You're not really listening to what I'm saying." I was like, "You're the minority now." I said, "Basically, you only have 5 or 6 of y'all. I was like, are 5 or 6 of y'all going to hold the tables from the rest of us? I said, because all the northern chiefs that aren't Red Lake are under me now. I said, the Alaska native is with me. The Oklahoma native is with me. I said, the southerners are basically underneath me. I was like, so that pretty much just leaves you and these guys. I was like, I said, if I really wanted to be an asshole here, I said, I could say, maybe you should find your own tables. How about that? And he was just like, well, fuck it then. I didn't want the shit anyway, and he fucking stormed off. And that's pretty much how it came about. It was just this really fucked up way that I kind of just, stripped him of power. And we ended up getting shipped out of that fucking, off that yard together, which is really stressful, but we got through it. We got through it. But so we went through that, and another native showed up, and he had come from Hazleton, and he was a Minnesota chief, and he was also a Ojibwe. And when he showed up, I got along with him, and I respected him, and he seemed pretty cool. And I was like, listen, man, I said, the way it's pretty much going right now, I was like, I think it would work. I said, if we had 2 cars, I said, you'll be in charge of the Ojibways, the Anishinabes, Chippewas, anybody who falls under those, those flags or whatever. I said, you'll run that car, and I'll run, the Sioux, and pretty much whoever else, all the others. All the others are cool with being with me. I said, that way I have the ones that aren't cool with me under you, where you can have a better time dealing with them. I said, they could report to you. And he was like, yeah, okay, cool. We could do that. And we did do that, and that's how it worked. So when Bruce showed up, he wasn't directly underneath me. He was underneath him, the guy that we had nominated for that position from. I think it was like USP Hazleton or something like that. So it wasn't up to me, but that native did bring out Bruce and all his son's paperwork so that I could see it. So everything panned out, And so this guy was highly esteemed, highly decorated, and in a trusted position, a basically secure position, because you're not going to send your spiritual advisor off on a torpedo mission, especially when he's he's definitely an elder now. He's an elder. It just wasn't something that I was going to do. So we basically gave him a secure and trusted position that would guarantee his safety, security, and credibility. And as far as we knew, he was a good guy. He played that part really well. But at some point in the circuit that Minnesota falls under, some laws had changed. When they changed, they had a very particular effect for certain people with certain charges. And what his situation was, the Supreme Court had made a ruling at some point in time that basically meant intrafamilial sexual abuse was no longer deemed a violent crime. In his sentencing, that charge, which was back from the late 80s, I believe, late 80s, early 90s, something like that, somewhere when crack was still a thing, they had abused one of their granddaughters So basically, they said that intrafamilial sexual abuse was no longer a violent crime. And in his case, they used this to enhance his sentence because it was a violent crime and it would enhance how much time that he would get. So, based off the foundings that they had ruled that there was no longer a violent crime, he had made an appeal based on the changing of the laws to see if that would get his sentence reduced. And when that happened, it was loaded up to the law library's database, and we were able to access it and see what they ultimately ruled on his appeal. And my boy Carrillo came up to me one day. He was a Wisconsin Ojibwe, and he actually fell under me. He didn't fall under, with the Red Lakers and them. But he came up to me one day and he said, "Hey, man," he goes, "you need to go over to the law library and look this up." And he handed me the numbers. And he goes, "We need to handle that like ASAP." And I said, "All right." So I took off on the next move and I go to the law library. And I hung out there and I read it. I read the whole thing, and that's how I know why he was denied. He was denied. They did say, they were basically like, "Nah, fuck that. You did that shit. We're sticking to it." You know, they basically said, "Sorry, but not sorry." They denied him and basically said, "Sorry, but not sorry." And it was there for all to see. So I read the entire thing, and I basically they were allowing one of their grandchildren or a stepchild of some kind to be favored out in exchange for more drugs or money or something like that. Something really messed up. I'll have a hard time keeping a lot of the details of these things straight sometimes, because you hear and you read and you remember hearing so much in every different shade and variation that they all start to bleed together. I could probably make something up off the top of my head, and I probably read it at some point in time. I've seen a lot, seen and heard and read a lot that it is disgusting. It is disgusting. It stains your soul. It literally stains your fucking soul. But the bro who had it for the Ojibways, I called him over on my way to the law library, and I told him that I was on my way over there to read something about Bruce. And I said he needed to make his way over there when he got a second to see what it was. I was going to go over there and I was to confirm it for myself, and then I was going to let him know. But what he ended up doing is something that I'm not sure. I never really know. I'll never really know how it played out. But what I did hear is that the bro who had it for the Ojibways was his celly. It was Bruce's celly. And I guess he got the word to come out because he knew that there was something to do with Bruce at the law library. And he told Bruce, he said, "Look, I'm about to go out here and find out whatever this is about you." He goes, "But you would know better than anybody else what it is that I'm about to go see." And he says, "Is there anything you want to tell me before I go out here?" And Bruce said, "No, no, I don't know what it could be." And so that bro said, "All right, well, I'm about to go see what this is then." And he turned around and he walked out. And he went to the law library. And while he was at the law library, I had already left and went back to my unit. Bruce packed his stuff up and he went up top. And that was the person who finally confirmed to SIS and them who was actually running the car, the power structure, and who they needed to actually grab up off the yard to make sure that they could get the yard back and run it the way that the administration wanted to run it. Because they did. They came and they grabbed every single one of us that actually had a say so, that were influential in how that yard was ran. It was myself, the Ojibwe bro from Hazleton, the bro who had the yard momentarily after the shot collar got scooped up to the shoe, and one of their close friends, one of the Red Lakers' close friends. They grabbed up about 5 or 6 of us, and that's how we all got shipped out. So the one person that you would have thought that deserved to really get got was hiding right underneath our nose the entire time, and we didn't know it. That bugs me to this day. That bugs me to this day because he there's guys that were super mad about it. There's guys there that got their Indian name from him, that got like blessed by him. You know, that they were like really opening up to and like crying in the sweat lodge with him and stuff. Like there were some guys that were really kind of close to him. He had really ingratiated himself into that circle and held a lot of trust. And we come to find out that he is probably one of the worst. How his sons love him to death still. They know about that shit. Maybe that shit was done before they were born and they just never really knew about it or what. I don't know, but they loved their pops. They said it all the time. I don't know, that stuff's crazy. I don't really know how to feel about it. I just know that he's one of them that got away. But Bruce's position became what it was because I no longer trusted myself to recognize when I was being excessive in my position. And when I realized that there was a part of me that was slowly being smothered, I gave myself a biomechanical sleeve because I was becoming a machine. I was only seeing the world in black and white. And so when I tried to run this Explain Your Tattoo series on Facebook, I caught myself having to censor pretty much every other subject. I caught myself having to censor it. I couldn't fully explain it without having to explain all this other stuff and turning the video into pretty much what I have here now on this channel. But what I was doing at the time is I was on this app called Quora. And on the app called Quora, I would write about what it was like to be in prison. And a lot of people on there, there's a couple comments that got thousands and thousands of likes and hundreds of comments on there. And they're telling me, you need to be doing something, you need to be speaking, motivation, you need to be doing motivational speaking, you need to write a book, you need to be sharing, you need to start a channel, all this other stuff. They had all these different suggestions. And I would just respond and I would just be politely, I would just politely say, yeah, well, thank you for the suggestion and stuff. And it was right at that time that I was getting all this encouragement from all these people on Quora that Chad responded to one of my comments and told me to email him. And it was some time before I did email him. I emailed him about 3 or 4 months later, and he said, "Yeah, man, here's my number. Give me a call. Let's talk." So I called him up. We talked for a little bit, and he said, "Yeah, let's do an interview. I'll call you up on this morning at such and such time." And we did the interview. And really, it pretty much had everything to do with how I was received on the interview that made me start the channel. And I started thinking to myself, like, this is the direction that this is kind of turning into.